Hello and welcome to season 2 of the Coreco Couch. Now, this time I'm delighted to say that we really do have some finance royalty with us today. Claer Barrett is the consumer editor of the Financial Times, writing the weekly Serious Money column and presents the FT's Money Clinic podcast, which is a fantastic listen. Claer frequently appears as a commentator on radio and TV, talking about personal finance, consumer and small business issues, a regular guest on ITV's Lorraine and LBC Radio. She's also a best-selling author with her book, What They Don't Teach You About Money, 7 Habits to Unlock Financial Independence, in which she expertly debunks the myths that keep us stuck in financial paralysis. And there is a copy of the book.
I'm also expert in self-marketing. Should be
and
added.
is an expert self-marketer. I could go on, but welcome, Claer. I'm so honoured and delighted to have you on the Coreco Couch.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And the tables have been turned because I think you've been on Money Clinic talking about
Yeah.
mortgages more than a few times when the market's had a particular upset. So it feels kind of fitting that after the most recent upset, I'm now sitting on your couch.
The interviewer becomes the interviewee. So, welcome. So, we're at the start of the year, basically, 2025. I want to just sort of talk big picture. How do you see 2025 shaping up in terms of people's personal finances? Are there any particular trends or challenges you think will dominate this year?
Well, there's not really all that much going on in 2025.
There's nothing going on.
I mean, I think my watchwords would be prepare for change.
Yes.
Whether that's in politics, obviously we don't know what the election of President Trump in America is going to bring, and that is going to have a huge impact on world trade, on world financial markets, and by dint of that, to dear old Blighty, the Bank of England, and where our own interest rates will be headed. But I mean, this is very much a global trend towards higher for longer, which is a phrase that I think will gain momentum, unfortunately, as the year goes on. If you're wondering, well, why are interest rates predicted to be stuck higher for longer? It's because people think that inflation will take a longer time globally to calm down. If we've got these trade tariffs that President Trump is threatening to impose on most of Asia and Europe, it's going to increase the cost of goods. It's going to increase the cost of doing business, the threat to deport all illegal immigrants from America. That is going to have a big impact, as yet unknown, on the labour market over there in the biggest economy in the world, and there are going to be some substantial ripple effects that will be coming our way. So within the UK, again, my mantra, prepare for change. Well, the biggest change that's going to be hitting businesses and the economy is going to happen this spring when we see those higher rates of national insurance for employers start to kick in. Now, this is something I've written a lot about from a personal finance point of view in the FT, because although the Labour Party can kind of stand by its manifesto commitment and say, well, we haven't raised rates of national insurance for people, just for the firms that employ them, it's going to have an effect on the employment market. It's making everybody that bit more expensive to employ. And there are some companies who are going to be much more affected by this from a cost point of view than others, and they're going to need to recoup those costs somehow, either by employing fewer people, by automating more tasks. And I think as somebody who buys a lot of stuff online, I'm already seeing that with the rise of chatbots as opposed to humans in customer service. Tills being ripped out in supermarkets, more self-checkout things being put in. They're just two very small examples of a much, much bigger problem that companies have to resolve. How much can we put our prices up? And that obviously could mean that inflation sticks around for longer than expected. And how can we pay our staff less? And one of the big messages that I preach all the time, especially to women, is when is the last time that you asked for a pay rise? How can you get your income up? Because being good with money is not just about budgeting and winnowing down and doing more with less. It's also about knowing your worth. And trying to get a decent pay increase when you often have to use a bit of muscle, and it can feel quite uncomfortable often.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going in and having that conversation. But if you're trying to get a mortgage, then of course the multiple of income, that's the metric that you're going to be judged on. So the higher your income is, the better it's going to be for you. But at the moment, trying to get a pay rise out of any firm,
I was going to say it's really hard at the moment.
It's
isn't
made it
because
much
businesses
harder.
I've seen and I've heard anecdotally of businesses that have just sent emails around saying, look, there's going to be no pay increases this year, or bonuses going to be cut because they are struggling to.
And they're worried about growth.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all having a dampening effect on the economy, combined with all the uncertainty that's coming from across the pond. It's quite a difficult time to be running a business at the moment, as I'm sure you know. But
I'm actually 28. It's been a very hard year.
But it's something that we are going to have to adjust to. We're going to have to prepare for with our personal finances, and hope that things are not going to be as bad as some of the more doom-laden critics are predicting. Are we going to have some unexpected upside because either the economy does better than expected, so we can all get a pay rise, or if the economy does worse than expected, would that conversely lead to interest rates dropping back? Obviously, stamp duty, that's also going to kick in at higher rates at the same time. But I mean, my view on stamp duty is, it's a tax on property transactions that is often reflected in the prices that people are prepared to pay for an asset, although it does have a delayed effect with what buyers and sellers are prepared to do to meet in the middle. But certainly a year of change.
Were you surprised that actually they're allowing stamp duty to go back to the norms? Because part of their rhetoric now is all about property and how do we get more first time buyers into the market. And were you surprised about that? And then sort of following on from that, how important do you see property within that economic growth area?
Well, the thing that worries me the most isn't first-time buyers, it's people who are renting. And I have a lot of colleagues at the FT who are in the rental market. My own stepchildren are in the rental market. And that is something that policymakers maybe don't have as much personal exposure to, or they don't think it will play as well with voters as helping out first-time buyers might do, because that's all quite aspirational, helping renters. Well, they've tried to help renters with the act that's still going through, giving renters more rights. But unfortunately, what that is doing, combined with all of the other tax-raising measures that have been placed onto landlords by governments of all colours, so it's making buy-to-let landlords sell up. And the scarcity of rental property is really the biggest factor in driving up rents. And I think for anybody who's renting at the moment but looking to buy, one of the biggest factors that's preventing them from saving for a property deposit is the astronomical cost of rents in major towns and cities in the UK. And we're seeing that creep into the statistics in all kinds of different areas, like, boomerang children, as they're known, coming back to live with their parents. If they're lucky enough and their parents have got a big enough house and are living in an area where they can also get gainful employment, i.e. London and the South East, that could be a solution for a while. Then you've got people who can rely on the bank of mum and dad to provide them with a housing deposit. Now, I did a column for the FT in the weeks after the budget called Get Ready for Generation Windfall, coming to an estate agent near you, because all of the changes further up the chain when it comes to inheritance tax and the ability to pass on a pension and the tax efficiency of that going forward when they tweak the rules, that means a lot of people are going to come into an inheritance early if they're lucky enough, because the easiest way to avoid inheritance tax is giving substantial sums of money away 7 years before you die. So I actually, plugging book, I actually have a chapter in this about how to negotiate with BOMAD, the Bank of Mum and Dad, because all too often we're relying on our parents or our partner's parents or a combination of both to help fund a deposit, but we don't really know how to have that conversation, and how any gift, if it is a gift, or loan, if it is a loan, should be structured, how everything should be accounted for and written down. And I think that the need for those conversations is even greater now with the changes that we have seen in the budget. I would really, really like it if something could be done to stop the rot with buy-to-let landlords. I'm not saying that all landlords are good landlords or bad landlords, but we have an awful lot of landlords who read the FT, who I'm in correspondence with, who are telling me that it no longer makes economic sense for them to rent property on the private market. And you can understand their reasons as investors for wanting to quit. But when that's having such a detrimental financial impact on, the youth of this nation, because to rent a property is unaffordable. If you have any kind of, disability, income from benefits, then, it's harder by an even greater factor. And these are just not conversations that seem to be happening about how we resolve this bigger problem. So people who are listening to the Coreco podcast and are preparing to buy a house, fantastic, that's great, and I wish you all the luck in the world. But you do have to remember that you are a very lucky and privileged group of people. And if you've got to pay, I think, an extra £2,500, it could be on the average transaction, it's a blow, but ultimately it's not going to take your dream of home ownership away from you forever.
It does. It has amazed me for a number of years that actually I understand initially why they started down the route, and I think it was Osborne, wasn't it, who started with the sort of the anti-landlord rhetoric. But in order for the property market to work well, you need private ownership, you need a good private rental sector, and you need social housing. And all three of them are sort of broken at the moment. And are you getting a sense that actually the government now are talking in the right manner? They're talking long term. And do you think they will get those three things in a bit more balance?
Well, you've got to hope that they can make more progress than the last government did. Interesting that you mention social housing. I think that is really where the big issues lie, that Labour is best placed to tackle. But ultimately, it all comes down to money. How are they going to fund the development of more social homes? Also, what are they doing to encourage the mass market for rental property, which is often called build to rent? So commercial developers who are incentivised to build a building like we get in America for the long term, which is for rental. The apartments that are not built for sale, or maybe a building where there's a mixture. Some are built for sale, some are built to rent out. Because I thought that was a concept that had a lot of potential, and it's been talked about, and people have been doing it in small numbers for more than 10 years. I was a property journalist before I went to the FT, and I can understand that Conservative government might think, well, it's not very aspirational to say to people, well, we'll give you a way where you can affordably rent somewhere secure that doesn't have mold and is properly managed and looked after. But actually, if you asked a room full of young workers, what would you rather do? Have somewhere where you could rent at a fair price, have to commute hours on end at ever increasing costs to get into the office on the days that you've got to be there, or have an imperfect solution to buying a home, like shared ownership properties. Now, again, that's something that really has exploded in popularity in recent years, just because it's become so unaffordable to buy a home. But also, a lot of people doing shared ownership, they say, look, I know that there's issues, it's expensive, you're on the hook for three things: the rent, the mortgage, and the service charge, and you can't really control any of those three aspects. So it's a lot more expensive often than people realise. But you haven't got the vagaries of dealing with a private landlord who may not repair your flat when the plumbing goes wrong and the heating goes off, or may want you out at a moment's notice so that they can sell the place or let it out at a higher rent. So people really are looking for security more than anything else. And I really hope that we do get some positive news on housing from Labour, because I think that is something that they received a lot of votes for from younger people especially.
Yeah. So what are the most popular questions that you're asked then at the moment? I bet you can't move anywhere without people going, oh, by the way.
Well, it's funny you say that, because like this whole debate that's coming up at the moment about whether we should all go back to the office or be allowed to work from home.
Yeah.
See, my own personal productivity is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, if I'm in the FT office, I will have lots of colleagues coming up, and they always start in the same way, which is like, I know I should know the answer to this question, or you probably get asked this all the time, or I feel really stupid for asking you this, but I can't find out the answer.
Yeah.
I'm never, ever, even if I'm on deadline, I'm never going to turn away a colleague who has that look in their eye of, I really need somebody to help, because there are so many things with our finances at the moment that can go wrong. And the financial industry is just awash with jargon, and also everybody from financial firms to employers, nobody wants to give you anything that might be constituted as advice with a capital A. You know, they're all worried about telling you one thing, you make a decision, and then it could come back on them in future. And the upshot of that is that there are an awful lot of confused people who can't afford to turn to a financial advisor or a tax advisor necessarily, and have got to kind of do the best they can on their own. So I like to be in the office because I like to hear, not just from colleagues, but from other people. People are contacting me on social media all the time, or emailing me at the FT. I like to hear what's bothering people, because if it's bothering you, the chances are it's bothering a big slice of the population. So in terms of what the specific issues are, one of the topics that I have been making content on for a while now that has really, really taken off in the last few months is what we call the 60% tax trap.
Right. Okay.
So this is when you're in the highly fortunate position, I stress, of earning a 6-figure salary, so over £100,000. And until you get to that point, you don't realise how savagely your income is taxed in that band of earnings between £100,000 and £125,000, 60% effectively, because you have to repay the personal allowance, which you get. You can earn £12,500 without paying any tax. That's the personal allowance. Yeah. What people often don't realise is that PAYE systems, you know, how companies pay us, they can't make adjustments to take this extra tax necessarily, because they don't know what other income we might have. So often the first that people realise is that they get an unexpected tax bill from HMRC. And I always see this, you know, there's a brown envelope being clutched in the hand of somebody who's saying, I really need to ask you about something. I don't know why I've got this tax bill. And I'm like, right, okay. The thing that bothers me about this problem the most is that it's avoidable. If you pay more money into your pension with company pensions, that's often ticking a box. You know, it's pretty easy to do. You can mitigate this. You're deferring the tax effectively, but it's one way around it. If you use salary sacrifice, well, that's what we call it, salary sacrifice. You can use that to pay more into your pension. You could also use it to like buy an EV car or even an e-bike. You know, there are schemes that are set up to encourage people to do that, because like saving for retirement, buying an EV, cycling to work, these are all things that the government wants to use the tax system to incentivise us to do. But if you don't know about them and you go over this limit, a lot of people are finding out the hard way and having to reverse engineer. The other problem in the UK, if you're a parent, of course, is that if one parent earns more than £100,000 a year, then you lose your right to a lot of the so-called free hours that nurseries will give you and tax-free childcare. So earning £1 over that limit could actually cost you maybe as much as, you know, £15,000-20,000 worth of childcare hours, depending on how old your kids are and, you know, how many of them you've got. So people's finances can quite easily get into to hot water. The number of people who are being caught in this 100k trap, if you want to call it that, is rising and rising, because the 100k threshold has stayed in place since it was introduced. And of course, inflation is pushing up everyone's pay. So in the last 2 years, the numbers of people who are being dragged into that higher rate tax band has gone up by 45%. So it's affecting more and more people. And then when it comes to your line of business, Andrew, people working out what they can afford to pay for a mortgage, you might think that earning more is the answer to your problems because then you can get a bigger mortgage. But actually, when it becomes so much more tax efficient to save for retirement instead of using that money in your salary to handle higher living costs, you're caught in a real bind. And I don't think we've really seen the full effects of this sweep across the property market yet, because we have had so much help coming in from the bank of mum and dad. But particularly as people are coming up to remortgage, going on to higher rates, looking at their cash flow on a month in, month out basis, tax is one of these issues that is just going to become a problem for more and more people.
Yeah.
Some other quick fire things that people are often asking me: where can I find a financial advisor? That one comes up a lot from younger and younger people because finance is just getting much more complex. The short answer is financial advisors only tend to want to take on clients who've got a lot of money. But I'm hopeful that regulation to broaden out the market and close the advice gap will change. How can I find lost pensions? Again, auto enrollment.
Right, yeah.
Great, you get a pension with every job you have, but people lose track of them.
Yeah.
You know, we move jobs, we move house. So again, I make content about all of these things on my Instagram. But the common factor in all of these is shame. I don't know the answer to this question.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
And I feel sketchy.
Yeah, people's relationship with money. Well, they say you get that by the age of 7.
They do.
Your relationship to money. Have you seen that actually people's knowledge has gone down, or their understanding has actually reduced over the years, even though there's so much more information out there?
I think it's increased overall because access to quality information is easier to come by. But the problem is knowing what's quality and what's not.
Absolutely,
so, social media, podcasts, the proliferation of different mediums. You don't have to buy a weekend money section, which is how I got all of my information about money in the old days. And how my dad, who's like my big kind of financial inspiration, that's what he did. He used to send me articles through the post when I was at university saying, you should open a cash ISA, and I'd be like, go down the pub, not open the cash ISA. Now, years later, I'm the one writing the articles and emailing them to my own stepkids and saying, right, this weekend we need to set up an ISA. But nevertheless, you can find out the answers to a lot of these questions online, but people still want that human contact. They still want to speak to
definitely
to me. Ring up a mortgage broker if it's something that they're looking to do with a property question. Have a financial advisor who basically says, this is fine to do, you're not stupid, and by the way, have you thought of this? There's this fear of, well, how do we know what to do? As the title of my book attests, we're not taught about any of this stuff in school. I think it goes beyond school. I think we need to be thinking continually throughout our lives about how we can educate ourselves about finances, because it's changing so quickly. But in essence, lots of people, lots of problems. Bigger problems concern things that aren't regulated yet. Crypto. Buy now, pay later. You can really get unstuck with those kinds of areas. Fortunately, I don't have too many people who I happen across who have come unstuck. I think most people inherently are basically sensible. They want to make the right decisions with money because they don't want to make the wrong decision. But equally, they know the odds are stacked against them. It's so much harder for my generation, the generation below me, Gen A, the generation below that, to get onto the property ladder without significant help from parents. And if you're somebody like I was, I might sound quite posh. I didn't have any. Well, I had £1,000. That was the help that I got when I got onto the property ladder. It's very, very hard, and I did it as a single person, which nowadays would be impossible.
Yeah, that would be impossible now. Yeah,
All
really
of
hard.
the content I make about the so-called single tax on social media, I get so much love back from people because of it, because it's a really unspoken.
I agree.
A really unspoken problem. If you've only got one income coming in, or you're in a situation where you've got one big earner and one person who's maybe looking after the family more and contributing in that way, it's even harder to get to the kind of income multiples that you need. Or if you're renting, for a landlord to want to take a risk on you. I did a podcast a while ago with a woman who was an accountant in Leeds. She was turned down for a flat by a landlord, and she kind of asked why, and he off the cuff said, well, if you had a fella, then if one of you lost your jobs, there would be less danger of you defaulting on the rent.
That's really interesting, isn't it? I think all that education piece, I mean, that's something, I'm really passionate about, and that's why we do our educational seminars within loads of different businesses. And actually the feedback we get from that is fantastic in terms of people who, I remember when we started it, you do sort of think that there's going to be a natural amount of understanding before you go into it. But actually there's actually not, especially where mortgages are concerned, because people don't do it very regularly. So why would they know about mortgages and how they work?
And just knowing about things like stamp duty.
Yeah.
You can't borrow it.
Yeah.
You can borrow the money to buy your house, but the tax bill, that's something that you've got to fund yourself. The professional costs, surveys, paying estate agents fees if you're selling. Not very many people know about home buyers insurance, which is quite a cheap insurance policy that you can take out to protect you in the event that a property that you're bidding on, all collapses and you're left with fees. There are lots of things that people find out about after the event in all areas of money, and they say, oh, you know what, I wish I'd known.
Yeah. And
I've basically made it my mission in life as a journalist to get all of those I wish I'd known and turn them into articles, content, videos on Instagram, whatever it is, just to get people thinking and talking about money. Because the more we talk about it, the easier it is for us to
it's like the last
find a
taboo,
solution.
Isn't it? Money. I guess that's part of the inspiration for your book, isn't it? In terms of why you wrote that. And is that your inspiration? And
yes.
What do you hope people take away from it?
It's why I'm interested in money, because I'm not a hardened capitalist, red in tooth and claw. If I had to just write about mortgage rates or some of the kind of drier aspects, should we say, of the finance industry, I wouldn't be a happy bunny doing that. What interests me is how humans relate to money and how they can use money, earn money to unlock the things in life that will make them happy. Because, money on its own doesn't. It helps, of course, not having to worry about how you're going to pay the bills and having enough to buy security, a roof over your head or renting somewhere that's secure. Obviously, all of those factors play into how we live our lives, our mental health levels. But when it comes to talking about money and people feeling all kinds of strange emotions, rooting back to childhood, as you say, that's what makes it so fascinating a topic for me. And whenever I get a message from somebody saying, either I listened to a podcast that you did, or I heard you say something on the radio about this, and that's how I felt, and because I knew that so many other people were feeling exactly the same thing, I was able to move on, whatever the problem was, to ask for help, to look for help. We haven't talked about problem debt very much, but that is an issue that hasn't gone away with the cost of living crisis. And I do get contacted a lot by people who are in debt and they don't know who to turn to for help. They think that they can sort the problem out for themselves because they got into debt by themselves. And I always say, go to Step Change or Citizens Advice or another debt charity and do it early on. Oh, I'm not that bad yet. all of the feedback I get from debt charities is if people came forward at an earlier
Totally
stage, there would be so much more that they could do to help that person rather than when they wait until everything's seized up, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul, they've taken out loan after loan. And that is entirely to do with this emotional casting.
It's that shame thing you spoke about earlier, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm not good enough to receive the help of a charity. You know, I don't want to accept pension credit. That's another one. You know, I don't want to claim a benefit. And it's like, this is what you're entitled to.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you'd have thought if you're getting money from the government or a benefit, you should want that.
I mean, it is surprising, but how people process their emotions about money. I mean, taking risk. You know, I could have tried to trade up the flat I live in many, many years ago. I didn't want to take a risk. I thought, you know, I like the flat, I like the area, it meets our needs. Lots of other people around me were saying, oh, you know, why don't you get a shot of this and borrow a load of money and buy a much bigger place? And the thing is, if I'd listened to them, then it probably would have worked out okay. But I'm a naturally cautious kind of person. And in the book, I talk about, you know, different financial personalities and what that could leave you more vulnerable to in terms of either being too cautious or being too risky. So we've got everything from, you know, the ostrich who buries their head in the sand to the YOLO, you only live once, the Spendy Wendy. I was really, I was really annoyed with myself. I couldn't come up with a name, a man's name that also rhymed with Spendy, because it doesn't have to be a woman. It could quite easily be a man. And in fact, writing about Black Friday a couple of months ago, there's an awful lot of retail research that says that men are the biggest buyers of stuff in Black Friday, not women.
Yeah, I can totally believe that. Yeah.
Did you buy anything?
I did, yes.
What did you buy? See, I'm asking you the questions now. Some kind of gadget.
Yeah, it was gadgety.
Yeah.
And my wife just goes, oh, you don't need any more gadgets. I love a gadget.
Yeah, well,
I don't know why.
The other topic that I've written about that's gone crazy this year is airline points. Because there's been lots of big shake-ups in the world of airline points and loyalty points. And the more money you earn, it seems, the more obsessed you are with credit card points. And I have to say, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this podcast.
You can swear, you can say what you like.
I just think it's a crock of shit. All of these systems, they are so clever in the way that, you know, the retailers, the airlines, they're sort of manipulating the kind of emotional buttons in our head. You know, spending to save is one of the biggest problems, I think, is people think, oh, I'm doing really well, I've got a deal, I've saved money. No, you've spent money. And if you're really trying
especially if it's on a card. Do you know what I'm doing at the moment, Claire?
What?
I'm putting everything on my British Airways Amex card because I want to get that companion voucher.
The companion voucher. Yeah.
And it's probably a false economy, isn't it?
From the feedback I've had from FT readers, the problem with all of the different airline schemes is that you might get the voucher, but then if you want to actually exchange it for a flight at a time and a date that's suitable to you, you need to book a really, really long way in advance, because everybody like you is trying to exchange these things and cash them in. So
and
good
I'm
luck.
just spending loads in interest on it.
Well,
anyway,
always pay off your card every month, because especially on those reward cards, I mean, sometimes the interest rates can be like, you know, 80, 90, 100%, you know, really, really high once you take the annual fee into consideration. So yeah, I'm not a fan of those, but that doesn't mean that I'm boring. I'm not the sort of person who says, oh, you know, hair shirt, you can't spend money on anything. I do spend money on things, but I spend money on things that I know I'm going to really value and enjoy. And at the moment, it's going through a physio session every Friday because I'm doing so much writing. I'm causing great injury to myself at 0 miles per hour, sitting in my desk and gradually tensing up. So that's what I'm investing in.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we've covered loads. I've got loads of questions, but we're not going to have time for them. I'll have to get you back sometime. Really interested to know, what was the best piece of advice that someone has given you?
Okay. Be careful who you marry.
Okay, that's a given. Yeah.
I'm very lucky. I'm very happily married, but that can have a huge bearing on your finances.
Yeah, we see that all the time. Yeah.
And also on your life happiness. But in terms of the best financial advice that I was given that I didn't listen to, it came from a chap called Warwick Smith, who ran the advertising team at the first magazine I ever worked for, and he said, "Put your money into the company pension scheme." And I was aged 22 and thought, pensions? I'm 22. I want to spend my money in the night spots of Hackney. Not, in this boring fuddy-duddy old scheme. And he really went on about it. And I sort of looked into it and thought, well, how much longer am I going to be at this company? And if I start putting money into the pension scheme, in those days, it was a bit more restricted about how long you had to stay in order to keep your money invested. But as luck would have it, I ended up staying at that company for 7 years. I could have paid into the pension scheme, but I've admitted this mistake in an FT article. So at least I got an article out of it. Nowadays, you'll get auto-enrolled, of course. So that takes the decision away, but actually finding out what your company pension scheme could offer you. If you pay in a bit more, will they pay in a bit more? That is a brilliant job interview question for anyone who's looking to try and up their pay by job hopping in 2025, because pensions are a part of pay. The best advice that I did listen to was in 2008 when I joined the Financial Times on the Investors Chronicle, and I had to refinance my mortgage. And I said to my boss at the time, Simon Thompson, who's the company's editor, what do you think I should bear in mind for this seismic event? And he said, interest rates are going to drop like a stone. So I agreed a lifetime tracker in 2008 when I had a very large mortgage. And the amount of money that saved me as interest rates plummeted and then stayed low, and obviously went up a bit, but then went down again in the pandemic. But also what it saved me in stress of having to refinance continuously and arrangement fees, product fees, dare I say it, Andrew, broker fees. So
we are worth every penny, Claire.
I agree. I think advice is worth spending money on, especially if you're not sure. I was in a fortunate position where, working for a big financial publication, I was able to get access to good advice. And crucially, I listened and did my own research. I didn't just take his word for it. I looked at it, read around, asked lots of questions to other people. And then when I was sure, then I made my decision. And boy, it turned out to be a good one.
That's good. Any last words of advice for anyone watching, listening to this?
I want to say something to couples. So
go. The floor is yours.
I write a lot of articles, and indeed, I'm working on another book now, which really looks into how we manage money within relationships, couples being the obvious one. If you're not having regular conversations about money, and they don't need to be boring, it can help if you say, let's do this, let's set a time. Your other half, if they're not the money person in the relationship, they may well have a load of questions that they want to know about money, but are kind of too scared to ask. And as I'm seeing with the oldest generation in my own family, if one of you were to die, or to die young, and not know where the money is, where the pensions are, what the money is invested in, the older you get, the more of a problem this is going to be. But I come across a worrying number of couples, and it doesn't have to be men, women, could be same-sex couples, where one person in the relationship kind of does all of the money stuff, and the other person just sort of abdicates to them. And if you're listening to this and thinking, that is a bit like my own relationship, if you're the chief money doer, as I am, then do something about it, and just say to your other half, I really want to involve you more in the money decisions that we're making about our future life together, and just try and co-opt them a bit, because I do think it's important for so many reasons that we don't have this imbalance building up.
Thank you. That's great advice. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for
I've
having
really
me on.
enjoyed it, and I'm sure all our listeners and viewers have as well. So thank you for watching and listening, and look forward to joining you next time to find out who is going to be on the Coreco Couch.